Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Notebooks Collective. Founded in 2021, we are a virtual literary art space focused on community, connection, and continued learning. Our next In Conversation will be February 25th, 2025 at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And our first class of the year with poet Jessica Cuello on persona poems will be on March 2nd. Please check our website at thenotebookscollective.com to see all of the details. The Notebooks Collective believes that Black Lives Matter and acknowledges that as a virtual organization, our offices are on the lands of the Kickapoo, Nipmuc, Agawam, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket tribes. Native peoples across the world continue to preserve and celebrate their cultures, and we encourage you to support Native writers and artists. As we do this land acknowledgement, we also want to recognize those who are suffering from conquest and terror in Gaza, Ukraine, and elsewhere. Our thoughts are with them. We know that these are stressful times, and we are glad you have joined us tonight to celebrate community. I now welcome Rebecca to introduce our presenters.
Weird pop-ups coming up. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Rebecca. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the other half of the Notebooks Collective team. It is my honor to introduce Carolyn Oliver and Hannah Larrabee for tonight's event because, well, to be honest, I feel like lately I'm pausing every minute to take a deep breath and reassure myself it's going to be okay. Take another deep breath. So as I approach this introduction tonight, I'm thinking about these poets and the joy and wonder and curiosity that they have. I want to spend this next 90 minutes listening and learning and sharing in the wonders of space-time, imagined lives, Trillium Grandiflorum, and more. I want to be in the space of shared creativity and learn how these poets bring their love of the natural world and mythology and the cosmos into tight syntax and imagery. And I can't wait to hear maybe about their love of tree frogs. It can be so difficult to be a witness to this world and not get dragged under by the news. These poets have the ability to pay attention to the deserving flora and fauna, and this noticing is so necessary. And when it's done well, it becomes extraordinary. Perhaps one of the more delightful ways to recharge and resist the darkness of January is to spend time with these two brilliant lights, Carolyn and Hannah. And now I will read their bios. And Carolyn, I just forgot to ask you how to pronounce Alcestis Machine. So please.
You're good.
Okay. Carolyn Oliver is the author of the Alcestis Machine, Acre 2024. Inside the Storm, I Want to Touch the Tremble, University of Utah Press 2022, which was selected for the Agha Shahid Ali Prize, and 3 chapbooks, including most recently Night Ocean, Seven Kitchens Press 2023. Her poems appear in TriQuarterly, Image, Poetry Daily, Southern Indiana Review, Consequence, and elsewhere. She lives in Massachusetts. Hannah Larrabee's Wonder Tissue won the Airlie Press Poetry Prize, and her new book, The Observable Universe, was longlisted for a Massachusetts Book Award. Hannah was selected by NASA to write poetry for the Webb Telescope program at Goddard Space Center, and she participated in the Arctic Circle Residency in Svalbard. She's had poems and reviews in Whale Road, EcoTheo, Adirondack Review, Glass Poetry Journal, among others. Hannah lives in Salem, Massachusetts, and is an editor at the Nixes Mate Review. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to turn and stop talking and turn it over to Carolyn and Hannah.
Thank you so much for that introduction. That was so kind. And thank you everyone for being here. And Hannah, I'm so excited to be talking with you.
Yes.
Our plan here is that we're each going to read 2 poems, and then we'll start asking each other questions. So I'm going to read first, and The first poem I'm going to read is from the Alcestis Machine, and it's called Blue Shift. In another life, I'm a cosmologist, lungs snowshot with chalk dust, an exile from origins eyeing the end, when Sigma's jaws close on quintessence or open infinitely. Consider Poincaré recurrence. I would be a harp, assembling myself in Andromeda's outmost reaches, neck and body joined in a glass casket, an open lattice thin as hammered silver gilding petals. I'd string myself so taut, a single particle wave grazing by would pluck me and send my trail back to you, evergreen among evergreens, braiding your ghostly hair into a sensible rope before you set out for the seed vault, antediluvian ledger of possibility. You decide what life's worth saving, what matters of matter, I quipped. But you didn't grin. You pressed something cold and white between our palms. Trillium grandiflorum. Tonight, snow tumbles over sophomores and starlings. The earth attracts it, wants it back like a lover, and there's a grand stack of journals covering your side of the bed. Restless, I slip out into tarnished dark, meaning to walk deeper and deeper into a future, into blueberry fields, a red leaf symphony reflecting old starlight's spectral ice. Between us, space expands. Cold sweeps the skies open. Vanishing, I'm bound for your pines. Please teach me how to gaze back this time. And the second poem I'm going to read is from my first book, which is this one. And it's called John Donne and Leonard Cohen at the End of the World. In the unholy light, stripping the horizon bare, the poets eat oranges and olives, the kind Donne grew a taste for in Cadiz. I didn't think the end would come so bright, says Leonard, in that voice like smoke settled in rafters, or a rock slide paused. At his touch, oranges melt. Out of golden lines at last, Donne nods, cleaning his oily fingers on a bit of shroud. He pours them both another ruby glass. From where they sit, could be a pulpit or a tower, they watch the slow sky of beaten gold collapse like a high note held until it thins. World drunk and bottle dry, they are two rakish hats receding into the dark. Leonard lets slip a bit of peel. Like a lover or a saint, it falls forever on its knees.
Amazing. I'm so glad you read Blue Shift because I'm going to want to talk about it a little bit. I'm going to read a love poem to frogs. So, Rebecca, you're right. I definitely want to talk about tree frogs in the spring. I don't know if everyone's had this experience. It's a rural experience, but there's like one night in the spring when it rains and all the frogs in all the world decide to just go across all the roads, right? And it's a nightmare for me because I do not want to run over frogs. So this poem came from that. Rain frogs. If you can just imagine a migration among the night fields, several inches of rain, the weight of it suspended for a time among the blades of tall grasses. Every land a wetland. So the frogs embrace their full dominion, and they leap across pavement because pavement is just a shallow, dark pool. A portal to the other side where there is another side. I don't know. The mind of a frog is music, is a full-throated song. I have felt one breathing with its whole body in my hands. As a child, they were tadpoles. They were eyes with tails kept in pond water in a painter's bucket in the primordial beginnings of life. Like gelatinous bubble wrap if nature taught us something of the softer elements of the earth. Can you imagine the love of it, of the earth, placed inside your hands like a wet stone? I am a child again and always beyond saving if saving is not this. Saying goodbye to myself in a torrential May rain, and among the grasses, a tectonic shift, colonies in motion, little green whales, acres meant for somewhere or something, unlike me, not in that way, not until I understand that what I hold in my hands, what I watched watching me, in those pale buckets was never mine to have or to lose, but to tend. No different than curling into yourself to listen closely like the heart is a cave and it echoes a sonic and drenched kind of love for you, God. I'm going to pivot a little bit to a poem that's been on my mind. This is from Wonder Tissue. I work in technology as my day job, so I think about sort of the compounding growth of technology and the alienation that makes us feel like I just wake up and think about that, right? Have coffee and think about that. So this poem kind of gets to that, and I wrote it quite a while ago, but it's called Museum of Natural History, and it's the one in New York City. Okay, so you took a little liberty with the name, or else I have not been introduced to the same kind of history. You should try again. Go with Clusterfuck of Nationalities Museum or Kids Screaming at Dinosaur Skeletons Museum. Then take me by the hand and lead me to the quiet pockets, the rooms of minerals, obscure geodes, cathedrals that they are. I could find myself in a place of worship, leaning into placards, studying the motherboard architecture of a silver meteorite. There's even a photograph of the 1980s red Chevy Malibu that lost its trunk to a meteorite in Peekskill, New York. Imagine the insurance claim. You might have guessed by now I would have paid to be there. And today, the Philae probe landed on Comet 67P, docked itself like a polite ship in a sci-fi flick. It all seems like progress, I mean to say. But here you are with your ancient replicas, asking me what I could want from the future, and I don't know. It feels good to see the weapons we once held in our hands. Now that robots take samples in space, take photos of us left behind. Leave me here with the meteorites you have. Don't usher me out just yet.
I feel like if we were at a reading in person, you would be hearing all the
Oh, the little snaps. Yeah.
So I love those poems. And the meteorite. Yeah, that's amazing. And I love all your poems. And I remember first hearing of you because of the Webb Telescope poems and being so envious. I was just dying. I was so envious. It was so cool. But nobody could have written the poems that you wrote. They're so great. And all of your poems are animated by curiosity and curiosity about science or nature or the natural world or art and museums and all of those things. So our first question was, are there any formative childhood experiences or encounters with the natural world or with some sort of curiosity, some scientific curiosity that you notice being reflected in your poems?
Yeah. So I think the more I think about this question, the more grateful I am that my parents just absolutely like let me loose in nature. And I think that may be a rare phenomenon now. But I grew up on a farm in Maine, and so we had plenty of room. And I would just disappear for the entire day. And Carolyn, I don't know if you had that luxury when you were growing up, but I'd be in the woods. Yeah, maybe not. I'd be in the woods, building shelters or doing I don't even know what for all day, and then come back in. And so that was absolutely a formative experience of my life. And now I don't live in a rural place now, but when I do go back, it's like that particular forest feels like an old friend that I'm visiting. And I just think of that often, that I had that luxury from my parents. And then my parents in particular, I'm sure had the biggest influence on my curiosity or my interest in science and nature. And my dad in particular, he was obsessed with growing giant pumpkins when I was growing up. So that was a thing. And they had a newsletter and like an underground channel. It was pretty intense. But he he spent a lot of time doing that, and then we had a tree farm. He also did taxidermy and was something of a naturalist himself. So our like annual vacation was to Joggins Beach in Nova Scotia, where you could get fossils. So we would do that. That was the family outing. So I think it's just built into me in that way. My mom is a lover of flowers, a great grower of flowers, and I think I love flowers because of my mom. One other small thing I was thinking about is that we had study hours enforced at home, and we could only watch a little bit of TV, and that was NewsHour, PBS, and Nova. And I think Nova, which I still watch today, definitely just piqued a lot of interest in the natural world and curiosity, asking questions, and that kind of thing for me. And I know I want to ask the same question back because we
I
have.
just have a follow-up on the underground letter. Wait, is that about the pumpkins?
Yeah, like breeding strategies and seed strategies, and like people were injecting the vines with. Yeah, it was a lot. There's just a lot going on there. I just remember reading the newsletter. Yeah.
Was it underground? Like, was it illegal in some way, or is it
No,
just
I just mean like an
like
80s
indie,
zine, like a zine,
like a
like
DIY? Oh,
yeah. Someone handmade it and sent it out to this whole network. So
that
um
is so awesome. And you definitely need to get your hands on that because I feel like there's got to be
yeah, if he has a
we're so
copy.
overwhelmed.
It was quite something to drive to Topsfield Fair from Maine with a like 650-pound pumpkin in the
You
back.
are one of those
That's one
pumpkins?
of those. Yeah.
Into the Topsfield Fair. It is a good fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have the
Yeah.
racing cakes. They
I
race
don't,
for the Oreos. It's so cute.
we probably weren't allowed to do anything but sit with the pumpkins, to be honest.
That's really
Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to make sure I extend the same question to you because so much of our work is in parallel with that. I think there's just such beautiful curiosity in all of your poems. And yeah, what sort of inspired you when you were young?
Oh, thank you. This is interesting because we also had limited television, very limited television. Jeopardy was allowed, Rescue 911 for several years, and Nova was generally allowed to. And we too watch Nova. We have family documentary night in my house, so we'll be watching Nova tomorrow. Usually it's on Tuesdays. Not that Nova airs on Tuesdays. Usually here it airs on Wednesdays, but you know. Anyway, limited TV, and I think I have two parts to this, which I was thinking about. One is for a period of time when I was a child, we lived in what we call in my family the house in the woods. It was an odd time because my mother had decided to go back to law school as an adult. She was in her 30s. And we rented this house. We lived there with my mom and my grandmother. My father had to keep his job out of state. And this house we rented it from the church. I don't know why they had this property, but they did. This is where they kept like the creche, the Christmas creche, if you've like, and like the big sign they would have the thing for the summer festival. That was in the garage under a blue tarp. And this house was in an otherwise completely normal little suburb of Cleveland with little post-war subdivision, lots of little Cape sort of houses. This one was in the woods. There was a little bridge that you would drive over. There was a creek, or as we called it, the creek. And then it was just woods. You couldn't see anything except the one house, this long gravel drive. There was a deer born in the front yard. We had raccoons in the chimney. And I am not an outdoorsy person. I am an indoor girl. So we were outside a lot because my grandmother would kick us out and be like, go play outside, go do other things. So my siblings and I would play outside a lot, but I mostly just wanted to be inside reading books. So I don't know, it's not quite the same as being set loose.
Yeah.
But
barrel.
And then on the other side of my family, my grandfather was an engineer, but I think if he'd been born in the 1900s, once he retired, he would have been considered like a gentleman naturalist. He was just interested and curious about everything. So their house, there were books about insects, mammals, the weather, space. If you exhibited any scientific interest in anything, you would get a book about it. It was great. It was wonderful. He would take us down to like a local pond and we'd scoop up pond water and we'd take it back home. And of course, he had a microscope. So we'd look at it under the microscope. said once that I was interested in astronomy. I got astronomy magazine, and there was a little telescope. You know, I think we were really fortunate in the 90s. I don't think every little girl had a family that was like, "Oh, you're interested in science? Here, have some science."
Mm.
But it was also wasn't expected like you had to become an expert. If you were curious about it, that was enough, and it was great.
Mm.
So I'm really grateful for him. But I think my favorite thing to do when I was a kid that I remember as like a science and nature thing, I loved natural history museums, all of them.
Yeah.
Definitely the one at Harvard, which we would go to with my grandfather when we were visiting Massachusetts, and the Cleveland Museum of Natural History.
Mhm.
Big fan. And also, I got to go on a whale watch once when I was a kid, and I loved that whale watch. That was one of the best things ever. And I still love whales.
Hmm. Amazing. Amazing. Actually, this is a good segue because you said you're more of an indoors girl, and so I wanted to ask about the genesis of Alcestis Machine because there's such imaginative power in the like refrain questions that you have. So in another life, in another orbit, there's several variations of that. So you're sitting and imagining all these different lives, potential lives, right? So just wondering, did those questions come first? Did the mythology of Alcestis come first? Like, what was the genesis of the creation of the book?
It's kind of a fun question because I realized thinking about this the other day. The book is called The Alcestis Machine. If you haven't read it, which I assume nobody has except Hannah necessarily, and maybe our hosts, the last poem in the book is this, well, second to last, is a long sequence called The Alcestis Machine, which is what I ended up calling the book because I'm not very good with titles of books. And it was actually, I think, the last poem I wrote that ended up in this book because I wasn't writing the book as a book. It was more, it's like, oh, I have a lot of poems. Maybe they will hang together. So definitely the Alcestis Machine, that poem did not come first. The genesis of that title is definitely from Greek mythology. And my grandmother, who's married to my grandfather, the one with the microscope, she loved to read, and she made sure we had books about mythology. So I don't know if anybody else had the D'Aulaire's mythology, Greek mythology. It was like a yellow book, pretty big, very distinctive drawings. I really loved that. And there are other mythological things that came across my desk from time to time when I was a kid that I loved. It's such a different world, different system. But the other parts of the book, that repeating phrase, so in Blue Shift, it starts, in another life, I'm a cosmologist. Those poems, there are a bunch of them in the book. In another life, I'm a fill in the blank with a job that I do not have, but wish that I could have, mostly. And those poems, there's one was the first. I went back and checked my dates, and I'm going to read that one at the very end of our conversation, I think. And that I wrote about 5 years ago, and then I put it aside. Like it didn't occur to me to keep writing them. I don't know why it didn't, because I had a great time writing that one. And then a second poem with a similar structure at the beginning of the poem is actually in my first book. That was the last poem I wrote that ended up in this book, but it was a very different kind of poem. It was more personal. And after that, more of these other, in another life, in another life. And I think looking back, it was probably an escapism kind of thing from the pandemic. I was at home. I was suddenly a fourth grade teacher to my one child. And I desperately did not want to be in my house or thinking about, I didn't want to write pandemic poems because I didn't have anything interesting to say about the pandemic at all. I had nothing original or interesting to say about it. So I think, based on looking back, I think they were just escapist poems. And I wrote enough of them that they could be sort of strung through a book to make it sort of feel coherent. Now, I know from talking to you in the past that you tend to think in chapbook size projects. So did the Observable Universe, which is right here and also very wonderful, what was the origin of this? How did that come about?
Yeah, so that one's a little bit more of a mystery. I think the organizing principle for that one is emotional, and I was trying to trace it back to maybe where that started. And I think the title poem is really the origin of the chapbook. And a question within it, which is like, I think I'm going to read the poem later. But it's sort of the question, what is still making its way to me, like Blue Shift. And I think that was the sort of like impetus for the rest of the book. I had other poems written. There was no like correlation directly, although there's a lot of space imagery. I kind of wanted to make room for poems where I went into space in that way. And so I think this is the most direct collection of that. And the other books I have were more concentrated projects. So like letters to Terre de Jagan or Wonder Tissues, like just a continuing conversation about the philosophy degree I have. And so those are very concentrated projects, but Observable Universe is a little bit different. And I do love a chapbook. I think I'm a big fan of chapbooks. There's just an intimacy to them that I really, really like. So I like the length. And even when I was at the Arctic residency, I wrote something like 18 poems, maybe 20 total draft poems, chapbook. And that was it. Like I could not go beyond that. I think I wrote the last one and I knew it. Maybe it will show up in the future, but I was chapbook length, and that's as far as I could go. So I do think that I tend to work in a chapbook form.
How long did it take you to pull together the poems in the Observable Universe? Is this like, are these poems that like existed over, half a decade, or is it like a year or two?
Most of them are newer. And in fact, Eileen at Lily was able, like, I kind of convinced her to let me add 2 new ones to it. So a lot of them were definitely newer poems written, I think, during the pandemic. So this is kind of the pandemic book, but all within a span of 2 to 3 years, I would say, for that particular chapbook. Yeah.
And I guess this actually follows into my next question, which is, so again, I know, because Hannah and I are friends, I know that you sometimes, or perhaps often, write in your notes app. So are you able to finish poems in the notes app? And so there are sub questions to this question. Are you able to finish them, or do you move them into another space like, Word or Google Docs or whatever, or a notebook in order to finish them? And other sub question, do poems arrive for you in one piece?
Okay. Yeah. I'm not so proud of this, but I do write poems in the notes app of my phone, and it wasn't always like this. That was a survival mechanism for me because when I got into technology as a job, I was traveling every week, or I was on a train or going into the office. So I was constantly on the move. So it became the easiest thing. Now I know I could probably write in a journal, like on a train or on a plane, but there's some sort of like anonymity when you're on your phone. Everyone is. So like you could be doing anything, and I started to really like the size of the screen, and I have it in, like dark mode. So I kind of like to write on a black background, which is really odd. So I guess if I'm going to try to journal ever, I'm going to get a black journal and try to write in white maybe or something. Trying to trick my brain to go back to a more tangible sort of form. But yeah, I do, and I still do notes apps. And then when I feel like it's a legitimate poem and I haven't lost it with a grocery list, I will email it to myself. And then I will compose the rest of the poem in a Word document. And the sub question, I'll make sure I'm not losing track. Yeah, so a lot of the poems come primarily whole. They're not finished in it by any means, but like the meat of the poem or the heart of the poem is usually there. And then I try to polish it. And I think I saw Matthew Henry join here. We've had many a talk about this over dinner, that it is something of a blessing and sort of a weirdness if when a poem kind of comes in its whole form. I think other people experiencing it that way. And it is like a secret to me. I'm not quite sure what happens, but I spend a lot of time polishing the draft once it's made its way over. Yeah.
When you say you spend a lot of time polishing a draft, does that mean like it's like in the sense of time itself, like number of hours spent, or is it like number of drafts or both?
I think I give it time. So time between edits maybe is the longest period, I guess you could
Oh wait,
say.
you have patience.
Yeah. Or I forget about it and then I go back.
Self-control.
Yeah. Yeah. With fresh eyes. I call it fresh eyes, but sometimes I just like forget about it. So yeah.
Okay, but have you ever mistaken any of your grocery lists for a poem? That's what I want to know too.
I'm not there yet. Yeah, my grocery lists are boring, I think. Maybe one day, maybe one day. Anyway, I know that you compose in a totally different way, and I want to sort of talk through that because I read your poems, and to me, they're these like sort of gorgeous sonic woven tapestries. Like I move a lot when I'm reading your poems. And so I want to know like what materials are you using when you weave your poems together? What is that like?
So from a material standpoint,
Yeah.
I'm such a snob. This is a Blackwing pencil and legal pads. So in that sense, I'm not a snob, whatever, generic, but yellow legal pads. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
The white doesn't work. And you would think, if you know me, you know I really, really, really love purple. And yet I cannot write on purple notepads. That doesn't work. It has to be, I don't, I don't know. And then eventually, once there's enough material, then that goes to Microsoft Word, and then I'll usually think, oh yes, it's so close. And then I'm in for, oh, I don't know, 20 more 20 more drafts. And then I might be happy with it. And but probably not. It's like this total nightmare. It takes forever, and I am very impatient. And I do tend to lose track of things if I have a dedicated folder on my desktop that's work in progress. And I will tend to lose track of things because sometimes a draft will come in. I have it under a title that then changes. It becomes a different title, and I won't be able to remember what the old title is. Like, what's that one poem that's about Logan Airport? But now it's not about Logan Airport anymore. Now it's called something about like, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire or something. I don't know. I rarely really know what I'm doing. But as far as other materials, it is. I feel like I know that magpies don't actually do this, but I feel like a magpie, like just like collecting things and bringing them back to my nest. I know magpies don't do that, but so there'll be things like weird street signs. My child still says things. He's 13 now, but when he was younger, he would say really weird stuff, like in the way that all children do, or completely inscrutable things. Sidebar, because I will do this with the sidebars, but I was asking my niece, who is about to turn 4, what she would like for her birthday. I said, if you were to get a book, what would you like your book to be about? And she looked at me very seriously and said, skeletons. Okay, awesome. Yes, we have another one. This is so good. But like things like that, like those will sort of accrue, those sort of images. And sometimes they have to sit for a really, really long time before they end up in a poem. And I'm sure so many of them will get lost. There's things in my notebooks. There's stuff all over the place. Usually I need to start with a title. If I don't have a title, it will be bad later. But to give one example from the new book, there's another life poem in here about being a museum guard guarding the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta, one of the copies, there are 4 extant copies, 4 original copies of the Magna Carta that exist in the world right now. So they're sort of, contemporaneous. And one of them came to Boston in 2014. And so I've been meaning to write a poem about Magna Carta for about 10 years, and a little less than 10 years. It didn't end up being about the Magna Carta exactly, because I noticed when I was there, there's this wool piece about about this big that travels with it. And I don't know why that did that.
Oh,
Stop it. AI is
you just
making
make a heart symbol and
I
it
think
did
I did, but I'm
Okay.
talking about blue. Anyway, it has there's this little thing that's traveling with it, right? It's this swatch of blue wool that's striped. And I could not get that out of my head. I was like, what is that? Why is it? What is it doing there? It has something to do with the light. And so eventually, once I got around to writing about this Magna Carta, that's what I wanted to write about was this wool. It's called a dosimeter. I had called up somebody, well, I didn't call it, but I emailed some very nice person at Lincoln Castle, which is the sort of the guardian institution for that copy, and said, what is that wool thing that travels around with your very precious document? And they were very nice and explained it to me. And it's a meter. It has a twin that lives in the dark. And this blue wool, if they compare it with the twin that lives in the dark to make sure that the document isn't getting too much light exposure, it's the blue is this kind of dye that's very, very sensitive to light. And so if they see that it doesn't match up, they put the document away. And at the same time, I was reading this other thing about this new blue that was discovered, a pigment that was discovered by accident by some people superheating some chemicals they didn't intend to superheat quite so much, and it made this incredible blue dye. So all of that ended up in one poem, but there's no way I could have predicted that that would happen. It's luck.
Sometimes
Oh,
you
and
just
also
wonder.
poems never come whole to me. It has happened to me once.
Okay.
It's that last poem that's in the first book. One time. It was like a miracle.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's a miracle that you can weave all these things together. So just
slowly, painfully.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you don't mind, on the topic of poetry, if you want to take this one on, not what is a prose poem, because I am not interested in having that debate. But how do you know when one of your poems is becoming a prose poem or should be a prose poem? Is it kind of a sound situation? Is it a line situation? I'm curious about that because you do work with prose poems and so do I. And so just wondering what you think about that, and maybe we'll have a chance to you could read an example of one and I will as well.
Yeah, I would be happy to do that. I've been mulling this. I think I don't generally set out to write a prose poem. I do occasionally write prose deliberately, again, slowly and painfully. I write a little flash, a little of this, a little of that. Sometimes actually, regular short length fiction, but not as much lately. I think what generally happens when a poem ends up as a prose poem is that the things I'm looking for in a lineated poem aren't necessary for what's going on with that draft. So generally, when I'm thinking about breaking lines, if I'm not writing in a specific form, if I'm not trying to write a sonnet or something, I generally want to break the lines for the maximum ambiguity. And I also have a perhaps less than admirable tendency to look for symmetry and tidiness to make things all come out even, which is sometimes to the detriment of poems. But if I'm not too concerned about that, or if I realize that the draft is coming along in such a way that that's not going to be a factor, that might send it toward becoming a prose poem. Or it might be about speed, because I think you do read a prose poem. As a reader, I like go through a prose poem much faster than I would a lineated poem, in the same way that short lines slow you down more than long lines. And then I think another reason would be if there's a particular narrative bent that might argue in favor of it becoming a prose poem. And sometimes if it's sort of one of the sort of off-kilter things I tend to write, if it's a little weird, a little strange, I might want that speed for the purposes of disorientation. If I'm going to throw a lot of images that are really, really strange all at once, it might make sense for them to come very fast to sort of produce that sense of disorientation. What about for you?
Yeah, I think it just becomes less about the line and more about the sound within. So it's not like I'm telling a story at all. It's just the fluidity of what I'm trying to say and how fast I read it. I think that's definitely part of it. But otherwise, and lately, most of my poems are very like short-lined, and long. And I don't tend to write with like dedicated stanzas anymore. That's also maybe a notes app thing where it's just one long line or column. So I'm either doing that or I'm doing the opposite and just running it through as a prose poem. That's been, I don't know, the last like year and a half or so of the way I've been writing. So I'm not quite sure. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, go for it.
I was going to ask about, I want to come back to the prose poems, but for when you are writing the poems that are sort of long columns where you're not breaking them into stanzas, how do you know when to break the line for those poems?
That sound, usually. Yeah, unless there's like a pretty line break, right? Like I can't not take advantage of a pretty line break. But otherwise it's just sound. Or clever, pretty or clever, But yeah, it has been a weird thing where I'm one or the other, and now stanza breaks look weird to me, and I hope I break out of it. Not quite sure when that's going to happen, but I do hope I do.
Maybe there's a reason though. Have you ever broken a prose poem into like not stanzas exactly, but I guess paragraphs?
And then I was like, no, this is terrible. And then sometimes I take a column poem and make it into a prose poem, and that works better. So I'm not quite sure what the relationship is there. That's some like deep psychology that I don't even have access to. But I don't know. To be determined. We'll see. Do you want to read us an example of one of the prose poems that you've chosen for tonight?
Sure. Do you have an opinion? I could read the one about the stars or the Splenda packet.
Well, the Splenda packet is amazing, but so is the stars one. So I don't know. Like, actually, I wanted to ask you, the stars one, do you consider that more of a narrative poem?
It's definitely more of a narrative sort of situation. That one was always a prose poem.
Okay.
I think because there's essentially a character more than a speaker.
Right.
But I got away with a lot of stuff in this book. Like there's a shot list for an imagined documentary in this book. There's sort of a long, it's too long to read, like a 5-minute long or 6-minute long prose sequence. I got away with a lot of things in here. Maybe I'll read the Splenda packet one. A little shorter. This one, I'll say the title arrived first because I also really dislike being told what to do, which is why I am a very, very, very poor baker. I do not recommend asking me to bake things because it's so rigid. Anyway, this Splenda packet advises me, and I quote, be the energy you want to attract. That's in all caps and also italicized on the Splenda packet. That's not me. Lately, I have been the energy of the kitefin shark, that enormous-eyed, fatty-livered slow cruiser of the mesopelagic depths, hunting the sweet edge of daylight and everdark, belly glowing secret blue. Given this encouragement, though, I'm considering attracting a new kind of energy, the energy of a petrified tree, 60 feet tall and 20 million years old, the one paleobotanist just uncovered and lovingly extricated from the highway dirt on Lesbos. Yes, I am now the energy of this tree that fell whole, all its tree organs still attached, this tree making the best of a volcanic eruption. I am the energy of slow hardening, of lying in wait for the right eyes, that Miocene kind of patience. Oh, thanks. You're all so nice.
I love that one. Yeah.
You tell which one are you going to read?
I'm going to read Observable Universe, which was always a prose poem as well. The Observable Universe. We've all heard the question, why is the sky blue? But why is it dark at night is something else entirely. It becomes a story beneath the science, like infrared of Botticelli's The Man of Sorrows, revealing a sketch of Madonna and child. Was it prayer rearranged into another prayer? We are left with what is observable, what we are meant to see. The universe itself is illuminated just right. What we see is the light having traveled this far, and that's it. So much light is still on its way. We'll never see it all. No human being, but maybe a tarsier with big soft eyes or some distant relative gripping a tree, the night sky getting brighter. I'd hate it. Leave me inside the sensuous dark, or at least be bold enough to bring me a brighter lover to obscure the sky, Andromeda, or maybe Saturn, and its rings taking a closer seat, the scale model of desire collapsing. 12 degrees tonight, and a ladybug clings to the kitchen light. The stars are clear as hell in this crisp air. When I ask what is observable, what I mean is what is still making its way to me. I've been told we create the kinds of relationships we want, and of course that's true, but it doesn't consider the distance required to travel. It matters sometimes to be far away. I am standing watching the ladybug, wondering which prayer was closer to Botticelli, the one he hid from us. That seems right.
Oh my God, it's so good. That's why I should have friends like Hannah who write these beautiful poems. I write a poem out of spite. You wrote about Botticelli.
Hey, that poem is Blue Shift, is it not, Carolyn? I mean, we're writing about the same thing. So Andromeda's coming. It's gonna smash into us at some point. Yeah.
I was actually just looking up how long light takes to get from the Andromeda galaxy for various other purposes. Not that long, though. I mean, relatively speaking. It's all relative, though, right?
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of the darkness. Okay, so I remember listening to a Jan Beatty talk on Zoom forever ago, years ago now, I think. And she was talking about how she, like many poets, she said, has this obsession that it's a subject that she's pulled to over and over again, even when she thinks she's done writing it. You know, she's written it, she's done, it's over, it comes back. And do you think that that is true for you? And if so, what?
Oh yeah. I mean, this is how my brain, this is the brain space. Probably we share this, where things just sort of inhabit the brain and don't leave, or we spin back to them. I've got many obsessions, and I know you started with speaking of darkness, and that's like one of my current ones where I'm diving deep into the what darkness means in ecological terms, what it means in circadian rhythm, what it means to us as human beings, and how we've changed the face of the earth completely in such a short period of time, under 200 years, by illuminating it. And there's just such good work out there about darkness. So it's certainly one of my things right now. But I wanted to think about your question a little more deeply, and I was trying to think about what it is that I always feel like I'm on the cusp of saying but can't say. And of course, that makes it worse because you just want to try again and again and again and again, right? But I think when I'm in a forest, when I'm drinking coffee, when I'm talking to someone, it's like the thing I'm most interested in is the invisible world that is here in the visible world. And I think that's constantly where I'm trying to be and what I'm trying to write about. And so I think some of my poems contemplate space, and by no means am I a scientist, but because that's like the most obvious context for that, where even what is revealed to us is deeply, deeply mysterious, right? And that we'll never know it. So we can know certain things and work with what is visible or what is shown to us, and constantly be thinking about what is invisible, and even in relationship to someone else, what someone's saying, what they're not quite saying. Those are the worlds that I find myself wanting to be in the work. And so I don't know, I just kind of, when this question was posed, when we talked about it, I kind of went in that direction, just constantly exploring that theme. And of course, our kinship in poems. I mean, I want to know absolutely what your minor obsessions are, what your little obsessions are.
I have a lot of minor obsessions. I don't.
Macarta.
Tim come up with this, and I was like, "What doesn't come back?" I mean, everything comes back, just in different ways, or maybe at different times, I guess. I want to think more about your darkness and invisibility thing too. So I was thinking about, yeah, I will come back to your too. I will answer this for myself in a second, but I just wanted to like think about. I was watching, you know how like Radcliffe, you know, the Radcliffe Institute where people they, bring people there and give them a bunch of money and they have to give a lecture at one point, right? So they put the lectures, you can watch them usually at like lunchtime on a Wednesday. They're the best. I love them. They're so interesting. There's this really great one on fractals a year or two ago. They have a poet every year too. Marcus Wicker was there, I think last year. I think it might be Tracy Smith this year. Anyways, there was a cosmologist talking about dark matter, which is not dark. It's just, she said it's much better to think of it as transparent. And that blew my mind. I don't know why. I probably should have thought of it like that. But you've probably already thought about that. Have you already written a poem about transparent matter?
Dark matter. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was thinking about
yeah.
dark things.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking about microscopic things. Does that get included in the realm of the invisible? Okay. Protozoa.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have the little whip, the little flood. Was it the
It's been
flood?
a long time since I looked at a protozoa. I gotta admit.
Me too. I think it was 10th grade. Pretty sure.
That's great.
It's like one of those like words that lodges in your head. It's a pleasing word. Okay. Anyway, so yes, I will answer this question. And as you can tell, I am rambling a little bit. I think this is a longer list, possibly because there's a lot of attention available, but I'm not always able to direct it in the way that I would prefer. So I think I sort of land on things for a while and then they go away. So if I had to look at, if I think about imagery, so like that kind of subject, there's saints, space, the ocean, whales, like art in general. I cannot personally draw a stick figure, but so I am in awe of anybody who could make any kind of representational, or honestly, even abstract art. Just like that is wild to me that they can do that. So I love looking at paintings and sculptures and things, and that sometimes ends up in poems. But I think probably what everything is orbiting. Well, let me go back. Sorry. Again, the attention is doing things. So the other like sort of more conceptual subject would be like motherhood and religion. I'm interested in religion, though I am not religious, and desire. But I think what everything is sort of orbiting around is death. Like, oh, surprise, surprise, surprise for all of us poets, right? It's death. But death in various permutations, death as absence, death as distance. And that's, I think, maybe where space comes in, where even space isn't something you can really wrap your mind around, because it itself is expanding. And whenever I think about it, I think, but what is it expanding into? And that is not a reasonable question, apparently. It's not a thing. Yeah, death as necessary, death as absolutely terrible and awful. I'm generally thinking about it in some way. How limited we are, and yet that's wonderful, except when it's terrible. It's mostly terrible. I think. Yeah, I don't understand it, so I think that's why I'm interested in it. And also, yeah, I find it both interesting and terrifying at the same time. Yeah. I feel like there was another place I was going to go, like a spoke out from that. I'm imagining this in my head, although not picturing it because I don't really picture things, but like a wheel, like that spokes out into different places.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you find that you were contemplating death a lot in Mount Auburn? I mean, you did a residency in a cemetery, so.
I did do a residency in a cemetery. And The cemetery, Mount Auburn is so wonderful. Oh my gosh. Mount Auburn refers to its permanent occupants as residents. So being an artist in residence really makes you feel like one of the gang.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really something. Yeah, I guess I was thinking about death. I was definitely, yeah, I was definitely thinking about death. But I was actually mostly also thinking about friendship. But friendship was a big thing when I was doing that residency. Um, and I think I'd like to see, I'm interested in poems about friendship too. Have this little, those little everyman anthologies of poems on different subjects or even by single poets. I have the one on friendship, and I swear half those poems are about dogs.
Okay.
And I'm like, I mean, cool. That's great. But there are also anthologies about for poems about dogs. What about human friends? Can we have more poems about human friends? Anyway, so yes, I was thinking about death during that residency, but I was also thinking a lot about friendship. And I love going for walks with my friends. And it sounds really weird, but I wanted to call up my friends and be like, hey, would you love to go to this cemetery and go for a walk with me?
I mean, do you think I would have said no?
I would love to go for a walk with you in the cemetery. But it's the kind of thing where if you just say to a casual observer, man, I really wish I could be with my friend in the cemetery, it's gonna sound pretty weird.
Yeah. I mean, if you run with poets, I think it's not so weird. And
I
yeah,
do run with poets. But
yeah,
I mean also others. Also
yeah.
other friends. Fiction writers, no, kidding. You too, fiction writers, but also people who are not literary adjacent.
Yep,
It does
yep.
feel a little odd.
Mm.
Yeah, speaking of residencies, can we talk about your Arctic Circle residency?
Yes. Is there, do you want me to
Yes.
just
Okay.
go
Sorry.
on?
This is what happens. This is
No, no,
why.
no. I can
So
certainly
what
go
is
on.
what is it like?
Mhm.
I guess maybe so maybe you could just tell all of us like how long were you there and how did you get there? What would a typical day during an Arctic Circle residency, what would that be like?
Mhm.
And can you write when you're sort of there, or is it too much? Like I find when I was in the cemetery, I couldn't actually write poems in the cemetery. I would take a lot of notes and take a lot of photos, but then I'd have to go away and process and think about them before
Mhm.
anything could come. So is it like that for you, or could you actually draft while you were there?
It was
And
almost like,
did you see
yeah,
any polar
it was
bears?
it was almost like I could not. And so most of the people who were there weren't writers. So they had their little like equipment or they'd set up and do plein air or, sound. There were a lot of sound artists there that were recording glacial sounds or the sound of ice in the water. Um, and I just sat there like feeling kind of like an idiot with like no gear and just like taking it all in as a poet. And I had a little journal and I did some sketching and I did even some sound recording. But we were up and had a schedule and checked in, had put on like 16 layers and your life vests and go out in the boats and go to the landing zone and stay there for 2 to 3 hours, come back, eat something, go back on the second round of zodiacs to go out on some sort of like island usually or on near a glacier. I did get to touch a glacier. I did lick a glacier. I couldn't just touch a glacier. I had to lick a glacier. Just had to. And then we made it all the way to 80 degrees north, which was really cool because we sailed the whole way there, and that's kind of a rarity. It just happened the wind was on our side. So anyway, so we were on the boat for 2 weeks straight, and that was an everyday schedule. So I was also exhausted by the end of the day. And I'd take notes, but most every poem was composed after I got back. And in total, it was like a 3 week trip. And I flew to Iceland and then Oslo and then up to Tromsø and then over to Svalbard. So it was a long trip both ways. And then from Longyearbyen is where the seed vault is, which I know that you love, one of the things you love. So I got to stand outside it, but you can't go in. Um, and mostly the big transformative part of the experience was the people who were there with me and collaborating, and then also just the vastness of the landscape and the weirdness of the landscape because we were losing between 15 and 20 minutes of daylight every day. And then it seemed like the moon and the sun couldn't tell them apart, and they were both moving like horizontally. It was really, really a strange place to be. And we didn't see another ship or another human being for that 2 weeks that we were out there. And so when it was that, it was just like I kind of just waited for it to like get in deeply subconsciously and then see what happened. That was basically the plan.
What time of the year were you there?
October,
So it was
like
October.
to almost late October. Yeah, right
Oh,
before.
wow. Okay.
Yep.
So the days were generally shorter then, right?
Yes,
So
there was
even shorter than here, where the sun disappears at like 3 o'clock.
much shorter, but there was a weird like in between twilight, both morning and night, that lasted a very long time too. So a lot of blue light. Yeah.
And that's different from like that what's that word? Alpenglow. That's different from that phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And when you went there, did you know that you would be collaborating with the other artists who were there, or does it just happened organically?
Yeah, it totally happened organically. And mostly after the fact. Though like some of the sound artists played like their glacial recordings, and that was super cool. And I think some of that made it into poems. It was like some sort of like knocking in the deepest hallway you could ever imagine.
Oh,
It was
that
a
is so cool.
really weird sound. But yeah, that all happened afterwards, and culminated in us having a show together, and that was really an amazing thing.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have it in one of your books, but I did have like a postcard from that show that was so cool because it was one of your images, right?
Yeah, I took a Polaroid camera because I wanted to yep,
Visual aid.
yeah. I took a Polaroid camera, and the last shot I took was that one with it looks like a burnt hole in the middle. That was the sun. I aimed it right at the sun as it was setting, and it like burned like a hole in the film and became that really weird Polaroid. And so there's a photographer who took that, blew it up, put it in ice, melted the ice, and photographed the ice with that as the background. So that was one of the cool projects that came from it.
That is so cool. And are these poems in a chapbook manuscript already, or are they out in the world?
Nope, they are not out in the world at all, actually.
I'll have to wait.
Yeah, yeah.
That's frustrating. I am very excited to read this. Did you see any polar bears?
Yes.
That's
Yep.
so cool.
And an Arctic fox, and got real close to walruses, and they smell bad. It's just that. But
They're
they're
cute, right? They're
enormous.
they're very big, right?
Yeah. I watch one get out of the water and try to get to the pack, and then like get tired halfway through and just like take a nap. That's all they were doing. It was cool. It was very cool. I think there were 40 of them, and we got pretty close. So
Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
yeah.
I'm going to hop in because we have a couple of questions from guests. The first one is from Cheryl, who says, as a library front desk person, we're encouraged to remember that we are just seeing the tip of the iceberg of a person, and there is so much happening beneath the tip. I think this is what poetry is about. We perhaps start with what can be seen, but the real depth comes from what lies beneath, and that brings the mystery and magic of poetry. Do you find this to be true?
Yeah, I think this is kind of what I was saying about the visible and the invisible, right? Very similar. What we say to each other isn't ever what we're always like the entirety of what we're thinking. Like it's about what we choose to reveal and what we don't reveal. Poetry is still the same way, where there's almost like silences. I think of it like a composition. There's silences that the reader fills in, even when the words are on the page. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, that's interesting because you can never know what's in somebody else's mind. Even if they're doing their level best to tell you the absolute truth, you can't access it in the same way. You can't see the same things, or not see. And actually, this actually reminds me, I was trying to talk about, I think I was trying to talk about Carl Phillips with someone. It's like, I think all of Carl Phillips's poems, to me, the poem feels like an iceberg, but only the part above the surface. And there's just so much, 90% of it is below the surface. And I'm generally not smart enough to try to even imagine what that volume looks like. But I love that. That's why his poems are so much fun to read.
I actually got to see him last week. He was here in Kansas City to do a reading at Rockhurst University, and he is so silly. So like it's such a contrast to reading his work, and it was really delightful to be in his space. We have another question if I can find it. Yes, Carol Lee asks, what is it about poetry that still feels magic to you after so many years of writing?
I wonder if the question is about writing poetry or reading poetry. I mean, reading poetry pretty much always feels like magic, assuming you're reading the right book. I mean, it's wonderful. People are geniuses. I feel like the way when I'm reading a decent poem, like a really good poem, I will actually, I'll get mad and like throw the book across the room because I'll be like, I can never write this poem. I'll never be good enough to write this poem. And I have literally done that. I may have done that with some couple of Hannah's books or all of them, but that's magical. How brilliant people are, and I think writing poetry when you I don't know if I feel magic when I'm writing. Mostly I feel effort. Mostly effort. But occasionally when something appears that will end up in a poem someday, that feels like a gift. That feels like magic.
What about you, Hannah?
Yeah. I think poetry's probably the closest I'll get to magic. It feels like an incantation, whether I'm reading it or writing one. And they're not all good, but the act of it, that sort of honed in, like super sharp attention. For me, that's like in combination with sound, it is a kind of alchemy. It is a kind of magic. And then to want that to be communicated to someone else is also this like sort of bridge that I think is very unique. Maybe only poetry can have that particular type of bridge where you're asking someone to be you or to think and feel as you. And that to me is just entirely magical.
I wonder with your poems too, like because when I read your poems, I feel like I'm following your thought because they're so smooth. Not that they're like smooth, like I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. I mean that they flow in like a river. You know what I mean? So I feel like I really am with you in your thought.
Right. And the same in yours where I'm weaving all these things together. It's like it's like an ocean.
Oh,
Like an ocean, mine like a river. There you go.
I think as a follow-up to that, I think people are always curious about which other poets read for inspiration. Any you want to share? Or I guess it doesn't have to be poetry. If you read novels for inspiration, it could be that too. I don't know.
I mean,
yeah. I mean, there are so many. Well, I love old Mary Oliver, so just in general, always going back to her. But I think my true like poet companion is Jane Kenyon, personally, and maybe a little bit of Franz Wright when I'm feeling a little bit more vague and more God hungry, I guess you could say. So those two are very important to me, and I read a lot of naturalist, like nonfiction as well. So Lauren Isley is probably maybe my favorite writer. He's right up there. And so he writes these beautiful essays, just gorgeous, about like flowers or how flowers change the face of the earth, which is my new manuscript's focus.
Nice.
I was about to say, he's the flowers guy.
He's the flowers guy.
He's the flowers guy.
What about you?
See, whenever I get asked this question, I feel like a deer in the headlights, despite the fact that there's an entire bookshelf behind me. That's all poetry. That's poetry D through Z. A through C you can't see, but it's over here. So I mean, I love Ann Carson. I have a really cool goth Ann Carson t-shirt that I always think I should wear it to a reading, and then I never do, but I should one of these days.
Mm.
I love Ann Carson. I'm trying to think what's on my nightstand right now. Carl Phillips too. Matthew Olsman, he's so funny.
Oh,
So
yeah.
So, and like, there's so many like poet friends. My friend Emily Moan Slate, which writes these beautiful poems. Violeta Garcia Mendoza's new book is so beautiful. Hannah's poems, obviously. I like that, Hannah, that you have poems for different moods, like poets you read in different moods.
Yeah.
I have basically my nightstand is embarrassing. I actually counted how many books are on the nightstand yesterday. It's 38, and it's covers. There's like a stack like this, and then there's a second stack that is this part of the lampshade. You can see that much. The lamp is basically completely ineffective because I just can't stop myself from getting things out of the library and paging through them. And then do I finish things? Not always. So like right now I'm reading this book by John Berger on landscape. I thought it would be about landscapes. It's sort of about landscapes, but there's just these incredibly written essays about basically whatever John Berger wants to write about: art, his life, different cities, violence, Marxism, whatever it is he's talking about. I like to read Carlo Rovelli because I don't understand physics, but I keep trying. What else is on the nightstand right now? Ooh, I just read this really wonderful novel in translation. It's called On the Calculation of Volume 1. It's going to be in 7 parts, so it's basically novella length. Think Groundhog Day, but very, very literary and so readable and so compulsively readable that I couldn't put it down. I read 10 pages and then realized I needed to stop, because if I didn't put it down right then, I would stay up too late. And so I waited and I stayed up too late the next night to finish it. But for poets among us and also fiction writers, it's gorgeous. It's wonderful. And I am deeply sad that only part 2 also seems to have been translated. So I have that on hold from the library. Don't try to get it out of the Worcester Library. Yeah, I don't know. I'll read pretty much anything. That's a very bad answer to a question of what influences you.
A great answer. And if your misery wants company, my library stacks are just as large and also fall over, which is very unfortunate when that happens. So we're at about 10, 12 minutes from ending. So if you want to finish up with last poems or with a last question to each other, however you would like to do that, and then I'll hop back in with some closing remarks.
Ooh, Hannah, do you want to do, can I ask you like a short question?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a 2-part question, because one of them I know is a really easy answer.
Okay.
I know, my question will be in multiple parts. No, the first question is, if there were a residency in space, would you go to the residency in space? And my second question is possibly related. If you had the time and the resources, what other field would you want to study besides poetry?
I would absolutely go to space, and I wish there was a residency on the moon. That would be good for me. So yeah, I would definitely go to space for sure. And I always wanted to be an archaeologist, and I think that's still true. Like even as a kid, they say go back and think about what you were interested in as a kid, and archaeology is a big thing for me. If I could do anything, right?
Right. Yeah. Time and resources.
Time and resources, right? As you know, I'm trying to pivot maybe career-wise to food systems and other things going back to agriculture. So I'm also interested in that in particular.
That's awesome.
And then, I mean, I can ask you this because I know, because you wrote a poem called Whale Fall, and I was like, this is when I first met you. And I wanted to write a poem about whale fall, and then you already did it, and there's just no way that I can do a poem about whale fall.
Your poem would be different. You could still do it.
No.
It was about, to be clear, it was about whale falls and Hamlet and death. So
right. No, you covered it all, so it's not possible.
There's other things. King Lear and death.
But yes, so a whale fall is like when a whale skeleton carcass, and it doesn't happen all the time, drops to the very bottom and it becomes a frenzy like zone for everything to feed on. It becomes its own like ecosystem.
They're so cool.
So my question is, if there was a residency in deep ocean, would you do it?
I would want to do it. I would want to do it. But man, I have seen those movies. I have seen the abyss. Nope. Also, I really do not enjoy small enclosed spaces
Oh,
where
that will
there
do
is no
it.
escape. Like an elevator is one thing.
Yeah.
Tunnels, I don't love.
Okay. That
I
would
want to do that though. Like it would be so cool. I mean, whale falls, like we didn't even know they existed until like the late 70s. It's incredible. It was like by accident that we learned about it. But if during like the height before whaling happened, there theoretically would have been a whale fall about every mile across
Right.
the migration routes. They're so cool. They're just wild. We haven't even had enough time to study the whole life cycle of a whale fall because it's like 100 years at least. They think of succession communities on them. That's so cool. But when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astrophysicist because I didn't fully understand that it's 100% math. And also maybe also a paleobotanist. I think that would be so cool. Also,
Amazing.
Laura Dern in Jurassic Park.
Just Laura Dern in Jurassic Park. Okay.
That was enough.
Why not? Yeah, I want to be Jane Goodall, that's for sure. And I think that's great. I don't know. Do you want to read to wrap up? I mean, we talked about Ars Poetica since we don't do it all that often, but we have
Yeah, let's do that.
poems.
Would you like
So
to read first, or would you like me to read first?
you can go first, Carolyn.
Okay. As promised, this is the first of the In Another Life poems that I wrote without realizing that it would become a thing. If I can find my little tab. There it is. This poem is called Flowers for the Virgin. In another life, I'm a troubadour, self-taught. On a lute I stripped from a plague-beaten body at a crossroads. Out of a ditch, his bare feet thrust up, small and pale, like onion bulbs plucked too soon. That lute called to me the way a dropped plow wouldn't. Belly smooth like a plover's, strings taut as the hangman's noose. The neck trusts me, my arm. And you? Your yarrow's the best in the parish for toothache, your primrose the cure for cramp. Come August, stinking heat, the convent pleads your sweetest flowers for the Virgin. You've never cared for music or the miller's son or idle hours. Crushing last year's angelica, already you know when you'll tuck lavender into your linen, which willow baskets to mend while the cow labors. Praise heaven no calf with two heads ever turned meat for song this side of the river. They say the priest refused to bless the mermaid babe, motherless, before its scales melted into rain. The sun's a sore in the sky, ready to burst, parching the road the color of unspun flax. Night's a lake I'll never reach, but here's the shade of your barn, your hands at work. I'll fetch you a moon made of violets, I sing. For you I'll harvest a bushel of stars. You tell me be gone, there's nuns with alms, for I'm not but a beggar with a voice. Oh yeah, one of my other minor obsessions is maybe Tudor England, medieval England.
Tudor England.
May have studied a little bit.
Nice. I'll read one from Wonder Tissue. This is an older poem. I have an Ars Poetica in Observable Universe. It's the first poem, but I wanted to read this older one. It's called Strange Arrangement. Let's imagine there's no place for song here. No place for where my mind goes, short-term, pointed pair of eyes scanning this arrangement of words. Are there stranger things to come home to? I don't know why it hasn't left me yet, considering we have been engaged, so to speak, for years, so to speak, but no date set. And I have no memory of the first time words took to me and me to them, and why this peculiar arrangement, everyone else passing notes in class, no liftoff, never was enough for me, bouncing my foot beneath tables, eating lunch in quiet classrooms. And you can't say it again. Just once was enough. I don't think forward anymore. Words carved in the late night raindrop topography of car windows. You have to welcome a memory in, no matter how muddy. They come so rarely in their true form, which is how I imagine St. Augustine or Teilhard de Chardin writing by candlelight, lifting their heads at the sound of a door creak, wondering if the time had come for conversation, which is how I imagine William Butler Yeats, which is how I imagine Edgar Cayce, both men horizontal and automatic streaming. Wouldn't you like to record more of you? Wouldn't you like to know more of you? Wouldn't you like to ascertain the exact location of Bimini Road? Wouldn't you like to write those lines, slouching toward Bethlehem to be born? Isn't there always a time that you will get to later? Wake up in the night from some dream vision, some more important version of the words you say, the tone you say them, the audience that hears them. Once, just once, get lost in the low-brushed desert at night and listen to your heartbeat in such a way that you vow never to misunderstand yourself again. And try to find your way out, trusting that heartbeat, its blood pulse urgency, the way your voice never sounds the same in recordings. Tilt your head at your own image someone else has captured. It is normal to wonder if this is you, set down here on a page, sifting through thought architecture. It would have been nice to have been beside Yeats just once, watching him nod off in a chair, his whiskey glass spilling, watching him slip out the back, so to speak, to be with himself and return himself in the morning to these demands, to this strange arrangement.
It was so good. You're amazing.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You.
I think that's all we had. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Becca.
We want to thank you both for being here. Becca and I always say that we're really lucky. Yeah, because we get we love having a front row seat to poets like you and creatives and your generosity and your conversation. And we're just so grateful for time like this. So for everyone who is still here, if you enjoyed this event, please follow us on our social media accounts and sign up for our newsletter. We don't spam you. We just send you information about events and things that are going on, and we would love to have you. Rebecca will drop the links in the chat. We have a full year of events down the pike. You can look at that on our event page. And when I say full year, I mean a full year of classes and in conversations and book launches and all sorts of amazing things, which we're really excited about. And now the best part, before we go, can everyone unmute and give a round of applause for Hannah and Carolyn, please?
Thank you.
We're so grateful everyone was here. We hope to see you again soon. Reach out in between events if you want to talk about anything. Otherwise, good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.